Hey everybody, welcome to the Bridgetown Church Podcast. John Mark Comer. I am here with the lovely Bethany Allen.
Hello.
One of my favorite people on the planet, as well as Gavin Bennett.
Hey.
Hi, Gavin. Those of you who listen to our podcast or follow along, you may know Bethany most likely. You may not know Gavin. If you're a part of our church, you all know Gavin. You are a little bit of a legend, my friend. Gavin is one of our pastors and kind of in-house resident expert on, spiritual direction and formation. You are project manager, for lack of a better word, for Practicing the Way. You work with our team on that, as well as oversee communities along with Colin Majak. And we thought the three of us would just sit down, have a kind of relaxed conversation, more in-depth, around our most recent recommended rule of life for shelter in place. I love that title. It's just so intense.
It's really intense.
great.
It sounds like a movie.
Although somebody just told me that Governor Brown said not to call it shelter in place. It's stay-at-home order because shelter in place was apparently scary.
Yeah.
Oh.
I like shelter in place. Shelter is a comforting word to me.
Yeah.
It's in the Psalms.
I feel
like
fine with it.
Place. That didn't scare me. Lockdown. That one scares
That's
me.
when
that's
that's a little bit more intense.
Yeah, and it was like, I hear we're going into lockdown. And then I just imagine like a robot outside giving me beans and rice once a week or something. So anyway, all that to say, we're here, we're in Portland, we're on stay-at-home order, all of that. And I think, a few weeks ago when all of this hit, I think the first thing that a lot of us felt was just panic, And then we moved through that to grief, and I think of the kind of 5 stages of grief, which are not really stages. They're not linear. It feels more like ping pong to me,
Yeah.
Or a bird's nest, the mess. And I think, we moved through kind of denial, like, this is just the flu, or whatever.
At least our parents did.
Our parents did, at least. My mom literally did. To bargaining, like, well, if we really do this good, 2 weeks, and then everything is back to normal. And I think now we're coming out to acceptance. And, early on, because I think we're realizing this is a bit of I hate the phrase new normal. It's not a new normal. It's, hopefully not more than a few months. But it is the next season of our life.
Yeah.
And I think one of our first pastoral impulses was in chaos to move toward order via a rule of life. If you study the history of rule of life, and more on that in a minute, it goes back to long before St. Benedict, who's kind of the popularizer of it. It goes back to Augustine in the 4th century in North Africa, St. Patrick in the same time in Celtic Britain. You could argue it goes back to the Didache. Have either of you read the Didache?
Back in college.
Back in college?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Same.
Yeah, I feel like you're lying, seminarian.
I am lying
Bethany
a little bit,
Allen.
but I have read parts of it. Is that fair?
It takes 10 minutes to read, so there it is. If you don't know what the Didache, apparently it's not that big of a deal because she went to seminary and never read the Didache.
Nobody told me to read it.
Yeah, it's all good. So the Didache is one of the oldest kind of surviving document from the early church that we have outside of the New Testament. Most scholars date it to the 80-90s, around the same time as, the Revelation and some of John's writings in the New Testament. And you could argue it's a kind of first century rule of life. And if you want to go read it takes about 10 or 15 minutes. I have a little paperback pamphlet, but I think it's all open source or whatever the right... Yeah. Open source? That's
I think
not
that's
what
right.
it is. What's the word for when
not?
something is free and you don't have to pay for it?
Oh.
Public domain.
Public domain.
Yeah, there it is. So I think you can just Google Didache online. Anyway, it's an ancient idea that goes back, I really think, to the New Testament or before that. But St. Benedict was the one to popularize it. And if you know anything of the history of St. Benedict, he's writing and working in the 6th century in the north of what we now call Italy as the Roman Empire is falling into chaos and kind of devolving and disintegrating into basically a failed state. And, it was really weird for me. I remember when I first went to Europe and you see these ancient cathedrals that look like castles and they have a turret on the top or whatever, and you think, how far from the way of Jesus and the New Testament idea of hospitality do you have to get to put a turret and a moat in front of your church,
Yeah.
Wow. But you have to realize monasteries and these kind of ancient spiritual bastions came about at a time when basically law and order was a thing of the past. So imagine if you were trying to cultivate a community of followers of Jesus in Mogadishu right now, or deep in the Congo, or in Syria, in some kind of a failed state. I mean, you would at least have like bars on your windows and a security guard out front, and somehow you would jive that with the way of Jesus. So the monastic movement, at least the rule of life movement, started in a moment of chaos. And I think the move of the Spirit is always opposite to the culture. So if the culture right now is moving, Philip Reef once said that humans' job is to take kind of disorder and make order. But right now, what much of postmodern culture is doing at the secular level is taking order and making disorder. And you see that at social levels. Sexuality is a great example of that. But you see it all the way down to like an Uber app or whatever. Like how do we kind of disintegrate and break everything down? So I think the move of the Spirit right now is toward order, what the ancients called a rule of life. And if you're a part of our church, or if you listen to our podcast, you know that we just finished a kind of 3-month-long teaching series and practice in the fall on developing a rule of life. All of that's available for you on our website and our podcast. We're also in a year or two long process of developing a rule of life for our church. In fact, the week before all of this hit, remember?
Yeah.
Feels like months ago. It was 3 weeks ago.
I can't believe that.
But we were our pastoral team was all down at Mount Angel Abbey, which is a beautiful monastery, less than an hour drive from here. I went to all the time. Used to go like once or twice a month or two, but now it's like, see you in July, maybe? I don't know. Who knows? Yeah. But we were down there working on this. I actually had this afternoon, I had a Zoom call with Jared Boyd. Do you guys know who that is?
No.
I don't.
He's a pastor in Ohio of a vineyard church who basically planted a monastery / like he's developing a rule of life and developing a church order. And I mean, it was like, and they're ahead of us. It was really, they do this really cool thing where if you're a member of their church, they pay for you to receive spiritual direction.
Wow.
Yes.
Like that.
So it's
Let's
like
do that.
20% of their budget
Wow.
is for people to receive spiritual direction. How cool.
That's really cool.
That's crazy. That's
We're
like,
looking forward to it.
Let's
I
Thank
feel like
you.
that's a whole side
Can't wait.
podcast. Yes, but
Yeah.
more we say
Wow.
yes, Jesus.
Yeah.
Amen.
All that to say, rule of life is weaving itself into our church ethos, and I think there's just no better time to move toward order than in chaos. I mean, so how are you guys feeling before we jump in? Are you guys feeling that chaos in your mind, in your body? Obviously, you're pastoring people and really in touch with people in our church right now.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, feeling the chaos. I think really it's, man, I'm not even sure chaos is the word for it. I feel like a little bit disoriented on top of chaos.
Yeah.
It's like this combination of the two realities where I'm like trying to lean into what is this new season, if you will. And
sorry, can we just put new normal like
new
off the
normal.
table?
No,
I hate it.
yeah,
Something
that's
about
right.
that. I hate it when
Tough.
people say that.
Yeah.
This can't be
it's
normal.
confining. It's confining.
It's a season.
I don't
We're
want this
speaking
for that
something
long.
else.
Season.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think I feel disoriented, definitely feel it in my body, feel it in my mind at night, especially. I don't know what it is about the evening, but it just catches up to me.
Yeah.
And and then just all over in pastoring with people and walking through their own trauma, the response to that, my own trauma, my response to that. So chaos isn't, I think, an understatement for a little bit of what we're feeling as we're trying to orient in this moment.
And there's the blend, like, it's hard to know, like, the work-life balance, like what's work when you're
Totally.
working from home
Yeah.
and when everything is digital. When are you working and when are you cooking dinner and when are you answering email for work and
Yes.
when are you getting sucked into Instagram? And it's like all of a sudden, all of my structure
Yeah.
Yep.
is just like a figment of my imagination.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to live reactive rather than responsive.
Yes.
right.
And to let Silicon Valley or let the news right now, which on one hand I'm grateful for, and on the other hand I'm really frustrated with because it's just blatant clickbaity, let's take scary ideas and get you to read our stuff. And so it's really easy right now. There's a whole like mechanism and apparatus and industry out there attempting to manipulate our disorientation, So we have to stand against that because, again, the cultural, I think, current is toward anxiety and lack of structure and no discipline and all off our rhythms. And are you feeling that, Gav?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'm seeing kind of in my life and the life of those that I kind of help shepherd and watch and take care of is like, I'm trying to hold everything as normal. I'm just trying to hold everything that I have together. And then I'm also like with one hand, like reaching out and trying to help everybody hold everything else together. And,
Yes.
and it feels like things are falling apart at the seams, and it's tough when, you're in a small apartment and your desk is in your bedroom, and so
Yes.
you're waking up, you're maybe going out to grab some food, use the restroom, come back into your bedroom, work for 8 hours, and then go to
Yes.
sleep. And it's just like everything is suddenly. So I just talked to a guy today who's like, it feels like we're in a space that is monastic, and I was like, yeah, I think it's monastic, but I think even on another end there's like, it's not a peaceful monastic, because there's this idea
Monks
of like,
are not like doing Zoom calls.
It feels
Correct.
like a prison
For 19
cell.
hours.
Yeah, it feels more-
monastic.
that's
Like,
right.
is there that vibe going on?
Yes.
yes, that's right.
Yes.
Confinement
and
meets...
and everything around us, like the news is like, information is power, and the way that they rein in that power is with fear, which is how they keep control.
And now it's politicized.
That's right.
And so there are people that literally want us more scared and want it to last. Like, it's just such a mess. It's like most people are either alone, both of you live alone. And so you're dealing with that ache and isolation in your head and not people to process with, and, the Zoom call limit or whatever. Or people are like cooped up in their apartment or home with a partner or a marriage. And this just intensifies what is. So if you were lonely before, you're more lonely. If your marriage was dysfunctional, it's more dysfunctional. If your family time is sweet, it's sweeter. It's like it just intensifies what is. So I think we have to find a way not to just survive the next few months, because I really think, man, I hate this time. If I could flip a switch and make it all disappear tomorrow morning, that I would in a heartbeat. But I think there's so much potential for formation and growth and healing and maturity. This is a make or break moment for the church. None of us will come out of this the same. We will either come out, more devolved or more evolved, or more like with growth or with backtracking. And so how is it growth? So to that end, I think a rule of life is just a way to participate in the Spirit's impulse in your heart and life to move forward into transformation. Just a short little kind of synopsis. Again, we did a teaching series on this that was hours of content, practices. We have a whole workbook on developing your own rule of life. That's all at practicingtheway.org/rule, Gav?
I think it's rule. I think that's
something
right.
like that. It's not hard to find.
Yeah, you can
It's
find
on
it.
both of our websites.
Yeah.
Here's the 2-minute synopsis. Rule of life is ancient language. It's not modern, and so it sounds really odd to our kind of Western ear. Notice that it's rule of life, singular, not rules of life, plural. It's from the Latin word regula, which is where we get English words like regular. It's also where we get the English word ruler, as in, like a straight line that you measure something by, and the English word rule. A number of scholars, there's debate here, but argue that in kind of the ancient Mediterranean, that regula was the Latin word that was used for the trellis in a vineyard. So if you think of a winery, and you think of the beautiful kind of vines, underneath those vines is some kind of a trellis, some kind of a support structure to get the vine up off the ground, to index it in a certain direction for growth, and to kind of make it spacious enough for it to really grow and thrive and bear the maximum amount of fruit. And of course, playing off Jesus' well-known teaching in John 15, I am the vine, you are the branches. Very early on, followers of Jesus said, okay, if we're the vine and Jesus is the branch and we abide in him through prayer and through our kind of living connection to the Trinitarian community by the Spirit through Jesus to the Father, if that is how we bear fruit, which is later defined as love and joy and peace and patience, well then, it stands to reason that if you're a vine, you need a trellis. Because without a trellis, a vine is vulnerable to disease, to wild animals, to manipulation. It doesn't grow. It produces a fraction of the fruit that it has the potential to produce. And a lot of people don't have a rule of life who are followers of Jesus. And as a result, I think it doesn't make them bad at all or God mad at them at all. It just means they bear a fraction of the fruit that they have the potential to really bear and grow and mature into people of love and joy and peace. So a rule of life is just a schedule and a set of practices and relational rhythms that make space for abiding, just for coming to rest in God through prayer and letting God come to rest in you. And it's a way really to allow us to live in alignment with our deepest desires. It's like there's this desire in our heart, in our bosom, as the older writers would say. It's like this fire in our heart. And a rule of life is like the hearth or the fire pit. It's how we, one, keep it from going out, and two, how we kind of keep it from getting out of control on the other. It's how we notice and nurture the work of the Holy Spirit in our mind and our body in order to discover and discern how to cooperate with God's work, you know? And that's all a rule of life is. In fact, if that language is ominous to you, rule of life, if you're an anti-rule person, I actually just found out today that prior to St. Benedict, who's the one who really popularized the idea in the language, that rule of life, if you look at Augustine and St. Patrick and others, rule of life and way of life were used interchangeably. So we are very familiar with the way of Jesus and practicing the way of Jesus. So another way to talk about practicing the way of Jesus is a rule of life. It's the schedule and set of practices that you kind of do. So all that to say, that was all intro.
It was a
That was
great
actually
intro.
That's all that
helpful.
was.
It was really helpful.
Yeah.
There you go. I wasn't looking for praise, but I'll take it.
You can have
You
it.
can
though.
have
Thank
it for
you.
sure.
I think the imagery that you're talking about here is so helpful, especially of the trellis. It's a game changer
Yes.
of just imagery for flourishing and for, producing as much as we can. I love that.
Yeah, and a lot of people argue we need to find different, better, newer language. I don't know. I'm not bothered by it, but
I'm not on this
I'm the
podcast.
minority.
Always, that's right.
I like not on this podcast. Don't have time. So to that end, we created a rule of life, or a way of life, or a trellis, or whatever the heck you want to call it, for just a recommended one for our church in the kind of stay at home, the pandemic, the kind of season of life that we're in. It's available at our church, at our website, bridgetown.church/online. And basically, we recommend 7 daily practices and 3 kind of weekly practices. In a traditional, if you're developing your own rule of life, if you pick up a workbook or whatever, it's helpful to think about practices and relational rhythms through like a daily category, a weekly category, and then we actually add, and a lot of people do, a monthly category, and then like a seasonal kind of category, even a sporadic category. So just in the name of simplicity, we just have 7 daily practices and 3 weekly practices. Number 1, does that come through the
Drum roll.
podcast
Can
mic?
you hear
There it
that?
is. My son is learning the drums right now, so there's a lot of paradiddle, paradiddle, paradiddle,
Oh,
paradiddle.
no, thank you.
That's my house right now. It's paradiddle.
Wow.
If you don't know what that is,
I don't know.
it's how you start learning the drums. And
Is that a word? A real word?
yeah, it's like paradiddle. Right, left, right, left, left.
Jeez.
I think does it mean anything? I don't know.
Do you play the drums?
Yeah, not
You
well,
probably could, yeah.
but I do.
I believe that.
I'm teaching my son. He will far surpass me. All I know is when all of your kids are cooped up in the house and you're working from home and your son is learning to play the drums, pray for me. Number 1, start the day in quiet prayer and scripture reading before anything digital.
Yeah.
Yes. A big yes.
So wake up, whatever your prayer thing is, coffee. I do coffee. I think
Lots
Jesus
of
would be very
coffee.
cool with that.
I don't
or
do
tea.
coffee.
You don't do coffee, really?
I don't drink coffee.
Well done.
No caffeine.
I'm down to 1 cup right now because of all the anxiety, so I'm like
Yeah.
limiting my intake,
Yeah.
and I likely should not even be drinking one. There's so much adrenaline in my body right now. But so the idea is you wake up, you start the day, ideally in the quiet, in prayer and scripture reading, whatever your morning kind of time with God is, before you touch your phone or look at the news online or watch TV or whatever. Andy Crouch calls this parenting your phone.
I love that.
Which is a great, and
Yeah.
you parents of at least younger kids, not older kids, but younger kids, like your children, if you're a mature parent, go to bed before you go to bed
Yeah.
and get up after you get up. So my kids all go to bed at like 9, I go to bed at 10. And that gives me an hour to be a human.
Be alone.
No, sorry
Be a
if you're
person.
listening, kids. I love you to be a person. And then, they don't get up until 7:30 right now. They're all sleeping in a little bit because of #homeschooling. And so like I get up before that. And so that there's a time there at the end and the beginning of the day,
Yeah.
where you're quiet and you're alone. And his idea is that you do the same with your phone. You put
Yeah.
your phone away an hour, 2, 3 before you go to bed, and then same again in the morning. And everybody's different based on schedule. Even if it's 10 minutes, like the idea is you don't start with your phone, news, Twitter, Instagram, freaky story, text message from somebody mad at you, email from your boss, this is late. Like, it's not the best way to start your day as a disciple of Jesus, you know?
Yeah, it was a huge struggle at the beginning for me, massive. I just,
The beginning of
pandemic,
pandemic.
COVID-19.
I keep trying
What
to
is
not
our
say that because I
title
don't want
for
to scare
this?
people.
It
I
is
don't
a
want to like
scary
add
word.
more
For this
anxiety.
season.
Stay at
This
home.
season. We'll
Stay
just
at
keep
home.
Stay home
That's so nice.
blessing that we got.
The stay at home.
That's neat.
I think, man, I instantly broke my digital rule of life because everything was
Yeah.
happening so fast. And I think, man, never in my life have I been more aware of the necessity of a rule like this, because instantly, days just filled with anxiety.
Yes.
My breathing changed. Everything about how I was interacting with the world was so heightened. And I know that, especially this first week, everything was changing so fast.
Yeah, you felt like you had to be glued to your phone because like
Totally.
every
Yeah.
10 minutes something would change.
Yeah. And we're asking so many questions about it.
Yep.
What does this mean? But quickly was like, I've got to get a hold on this because this is really, really influencing who I am.
Yes.
And now more than ever, I need to
noticed
be a person.
that. So I have a digital rule of life. It went out the window like 2 seconds after I got
Yeah.
the text. Governor Brown just shut down public gatherings. It was on a Thursday. I got the text. My phone was actually off because on Thursdays I don't look at my phone till noon. I work on my sermon in the morning. So I was halfway through my sermon that I don't know if I will ever preach right now. It's just a Word document on my laptop. And from that Thursday at noon till Sunday was just nuts. But yeah, so it went right out the window. And then by the second week, I noticed I was so easily agitated with my wife and my kids, because I think I have this gear that I'm pretty type A. I have this like gear I can kick into where I just I move at this pace and I can just get stuff done.
Yeah.
But I am not a loving, gentle person at all. And my family does not have that gear, at least not, or they're just mature enough to not utilize it. And so, the phone, it conditions you to have everything you want fast.
Yeah.
And it conditions you to feel more in control of the world than you actually are. And so it's a powerful formation device or deformation device to make you not only anxious, but also more easily agitated when you don't get your own way, more hurried, less present to the moment.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Gab over here is just like digital
And he
rule
was
life
perfect.
ninja.
No. I was just thinking actually how, it's almost like for me, when I check my phone before I spend time with Jesus, it's like, this was never a part of my experience. Maybe it was part of some of your experiences, but when you go camping with your dad and wake up at the crack of dawn to go fishing out on the lake, and we see these movies and stuff, and when you go to the lake, it's entirely flat and you can
Yes.
see the full reflection.
Morning lake.
That's right.
Yes.
And it's so beautiful. And then the fishermen go out, or the fisherwomen, and whoever they are,
Yes.
out in their boats, and all of a sudden the ripples go, and the vision,
And the birds, and the fish.
and everything is going, and your vision into the lake is suddenly not as clear, and also the reflection on it of the sky is not clear either. And so I've noticed in me that when I check my phone before I sit with Jesus, it's as if that lake that was very
Wow.
clear and clean is not that anymore, and
What a
I'm
good
wanting
word
God to speak
picture.
fast, and God just doesn't do that.
Yeah.
And so then I'll okay, fine, well, I guess we're done, and then I'll move on, and I'm in that frenetic pace for the rest of the day.
Yeah. And that's the thing is part of prayer is it's not just a discipline, it's waiting on God, and God comes
That's
on his
right.
own timetable.
That's right.
And God does what God wants to do. It's one of the first things you realize when you take prayer and spiritual formation seriously is that this is not a self-improvement project for Jesus.
Yeah.
You're not in control.
Yeah.
You're the sheep, he is the shepherd.
Yeah.
And that means you wait on him and you wait on his timing and you welcome his work in your soul and you wait for it.
Yeah.
And in my experience that just doesn't happen really fast.
That's
Maybe
right.
I'm just
Yeah.
a slow learner.
No.
But yeah, those morning, I love that picture of the lake. I just think that for me, Sabbath and morning prayer are the anchor points for me
Yeah.
at an
Yeah.
emotional level and spiritual level. Just the anchor points, I read this interesting thing on neurogenesis. I wasn't familiar with that, which is apparently this is my non-doctor. I don't know what I'm
I'm
talking
loving
about.
this. We're here
Great,
with
teach
Dr.
us.
Comer.
We're here with no explanation. I know just enough to be dangerous, but apparently, as you sleep, it's like the most important part of the day for your brain and if you're hearing that, Bethany's earring just fell off. It's okay. We're
There's so
rocking
much
it.
oppression
It's a pandemic.
in ministry.
Oh my gosh. You had to take it there. But apparently as you sleep, like your brain is regenerating. I don't understand how that works to give you a better scientific neuron kind of explanation. And this thing basically said that the two most important times for your brain are what you do with it before you go to sleep and what you do with it when you first wake up. That affects the neurogenesis in between. It affects your overall mental health and intelligence and creativity and all of that. And I just thought, man, it's crazy in a world where most people end the day by watching Netflix, often like violence or fear or pornography basically, or full-on pornography, and then often start the day with like Instagram, Twitter, email, scary news story, stimuli, fear, pandering. It's like, man, what is that doing to your brain?
It's great.
Yeah. And it's heightening that cortisol or the adrenaline rush
Yes.
too, which hijacks every other healthy, process in your brain.
Yes.
So you're not only are you having that experience and you're actually inhibiting
Yes.
the health.
And you
and
can't be
vitality of it.
responsive and you are reactive,
Yeah.
That's right.
So that's number one. Number two, create a gratitude ritual. What do you guys do?
Gav?
Yeah, so part of my gratitude ritual is every morning I end my time with Jesus reading poetry. Right now I'm reading through Mary Oliver.
Oh, come on.
Which is great. Her
Which one?
devotions.
Devotions, yeah, I'm
It's-
reading that too.
It's incredible. And so I'll read one poem from her and kind of sit with it. And then there's this other poem that I've been reading every morning. And I can't remember it. It's entirely unhelpful. It's called Vow. That's all I know. And it's basically his commitment. He's an author and a poet, but he also is a farmer. And it's not Wendellberry as much as it sounds like it is. And it's his
more than
commitment to like yield to yielding. And like part of my gratitude ritual is to in that read and just be grateful that like people create and remember that like even in the normal parts of my day, like emails and things that don't feel creative, I get to create. Like that's part of my Imago Dei is to be generative in what I do. And that's where I like to start my gratitude because that's a functional level of who I am. And then I like to go from that place and just like pay attention to each thing that I see and thank the Lord for it as I'm on my way to get breakfast or whatever it is.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, same. Exactly.
You just read poetry and have really
I
deep
do
thoughts
read
about
poetry, to be
generativity.
fair. And you started me on that. And
Yeah.
then Gavin's Fan the Flame. So my two poetry.
I think I gave you
Muses?
Wendellberry's Sabbath or
Yes.
his
It's
Given.
so good.
Sabbath.
I can't
and
remember.
I have
I was a
your-
late
I have your Given,
adopter to
too.
poetry. But
I borrowed that.
oh, you borrowed my. I was looking
You
for that.
told me to
I
borrow
wanted to
it.
read that on Sabbath.
You told me to borrow it. I can bring it
Yeah,
back.
and it was implied,
I
and
think it was
return
a
it
year
when you're
ago.
done.
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, I've been reading it, so thank you. But actually, I'm reading a different one. But I'm doing that. But honestly, for me, I just start a new kind of rhythm of gratitude. I used to get caught up in the morning doing like thank you for just stuff from the day before, and I just can't. That just doesn't bode well for me. So I do a slow down, kind of do centering prayer kind of work. But then in the morning, I try to do my farmer gratitude. I just try to do farmer gratitude kind of things where I thank God for, the beauty outside my window
Yeah.
and different things like that. So I try to take it slow in the morning. And then at night, I have a ritual before I go to bed to be grateful, to do an inventory of the day, sort of
Yeah,
an
like an
examine-ish
examine
kind of thing, and practice gratitude for what has taken place. And for me,
Yeah.
that's just been a gift, when I do it.
yeah.
Whatever we're in,
When you're on the
COVID
rule of
pandemic,
life for the whatever,
it's
yeah.
different, but that it's forced me to. I love that gratitude forces you to slow down and be present to
That's
what
right.
is. It
Yeah.
is that discipline of that. So, I
And that's
love
the
it.
funny thing. This is a new idea for me, but gratitude as like an antidote to anxiety.
Yeah,
you know.
love
great.
that.
And in a time like that, if you think about anxiety as a kind of grasping for control of what we do not have in the future, whereas gratitude is a form of kind of giving thanks for what we do have in the present.
That's
Yeah.
great.
And so in a time where there's just so much anxiety and I just feel that in my body,
Yeah.
like I think the move is toward gratitude. So I'm just really simple. I like come up with a couple things in the morning. I write them down. I have a little pad I write my morning prayer stuff on, and I write down a few gratitudes to start. And then at the dinner table, we go around the table as a family and just,
that's great.
what are you guys grateful for? And, our son, every single day, it's the same thing. The dog, the dog, the dog.
And you're
Just
like,
to
me
remind
too.
you.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of love her. That's another podcast.
Oh, I love that.
Number 3, exercise or go for a walk. in parentheses, 6 feet apart, exclamation point, close parentheses, if you're
Yes.
on the website.
Oof.
I think
Unless-
the idea there is, to get into your body
That's right.
Yeah.
and a little bit out of your mind. Often I think we attempt, this is very much my personality, but we attempt to deal with anxiety in the mental space alone. And we forget that fear is first a signal from our body.
Yeah.
And even that bifurcation of mind and body is not a scientific one.
Sure.
It doesn't actually really mirror reality. And because your thoughts, emotions are basically indistinguishable from thoughts at a scientific level, and thoughts are basically indistinguishable from your body. Like they're literally in your neurosystem. So you are a body, and you don't have a body in biblical theology. And so I think one of the best ways to deal with anxiety and pressure and overload and distraction, to kind of detoxify from the digital space or Zoom meetings all afternoon, is just to go on a walk or get your heart rate up, do a spin class at home or whatever, go on a run. I've been running a lot. I see more people running than
Yeah.
I've ever
Yeah.
before in the city. It's really cool. It's like
Yeah.
their one guilt-free, Governor Brown approved excuse to get out of the apartment.
They're everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I think, even I just was thinking scientifically about it for my own self. When this first started, I just was like, you've got to get out. One, to connect with nature, to not look at a screen, and to just remember that you are
Yes.
in a universe.
Yes.
And there's something governing it. That was really helpful. But then, too, that idea of bilateral stimulation and how that helps you begin to
Right.
process. For me, so often when I'm stuck in my thought process, my creativity, even my ability to process emotions that I'm
Yeah.
feeling that are actually lodged somewhere in my body, I can feel it, I'm carrying it. That the unique gift of the bilateral stimulation of right, left, right, left, right,
Yeah.
left, it does something to help open up
Wow.
that space of processing. And so for me, aside from it being healthy and I'm in nature and all that, it has been one of my greatest places of actual clarity and processing as I'm moving my body and beginning just to involve myself with what's really going on inside,
Wow, that's so good.
great.
One of the things I notice when I go outside is that life is way better than I think and feel it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because if you live in the digital space, everything is horrible.
Yeah.
And there is very legitimate pain, suffering, tragedy, scary stuff. I get that. But then I walk outside and I'm like, oh, it's spring.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I'm not
Yes.
hungry right now. I'm not thirsty. I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm here, and I'm with Jesus. And even if I get sick or God forbid the word, I'm okay,
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I realized not only am I okay, I'm good.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I forgot that when I'm in the digital space, I forgot that you can still be at peace and happy in April of 2020. And that's not at all to downplay at all
Right.
the legitimate
course.
suffering, pain at all. Please do not mishear me that.
course.
But I think it's really good for me to be outside and just realize, oh, wow, it's a beautiful world.
Yeah. I think you think it's going to be like the Godzilla film when you step outside. Like that's how the first week I was
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
surely buildings are collapsing to the
Yeah.
ground and there's
Yes.
fires on my street and people are,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like you're actually looking for carnage, which I
Yeah.
know is like really maybe
And
do.
zombies are
maybe it's
just
just
days
me.
away.
That's right. We're waiting.
Right, like this dystopian, like weird
Yes.
Hunger Games, like here we all are. People are running from other people or something. But I think you're right. It does connect you in a different way. With like it's okay. And again, it's all that I think Wendell Berry stuff of
Yeah.
just like slowing down to
Being
see
present to what is.
Yes, and where God is and where He's at work
And where's the good and the beautiful and the
yeah,
true.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Number 4 is one focal practice. And then there's a list here of examples, stuff like walking or gardening or woodworking or cooking or making love to your spouse or reading or poetry or art or chess. Focal practice, we stole that language from Albert Borgman, his book Living into Focus, which Borgman, he's dead now, was a philosopher of media. And so similar to Marshall McLuhan, if you've read his work, I think Borgman was in Montana. He wrote this great little book, Living into Focus. And it's basically, it's a critique, it's a pre-digital age book. So he would freak out now. I think it was written in the 90s. So it's a critique of television and entertainment. And there's this whole sociological kind of research around how the home used to be built around a table and a hearth. And now it's built around a TV, which is not even true anymore. Now it's like just every child has their own device.
Yeah.
And his whole thing is what we need in the modern era. And again, he's writing before the smartphone is what he calls focal practices. Just practices, they can be things that we love. They don't have to be like spiritual disciplines. They can be like knitting or walking your dog that just draw you to the moment and really draw you to the goodness of the moment, like to where you're in the Polish guy whose name I can never remember how to pronounce, the journalist flow. You know, you're just in that where you're there and you're almost like timeless. You're just there. So for me, this is so embarrassing because I was an anti-dog guy for a long time, but right now it's walking my dog in Forest Park. Like just watching her leap for, I mean, just unbounded joy.
Yeah.
When she's out there, I mean, it's just like dogs can smile. I don't care what you say. And it's just watching embodied joy. And all of a sudden I forget like all of the dire, what could happen over the next year and how's our church going to hold together and all. And I just get lost in the moment of watching my dog jump around Forest Park, you know?
Wow.
Look at you being sanctified.
Look at
through and
me.
through.
Who would have guessed
Took
you were a
me
dog
about
guy?
a year and a
Growth
half
Wow.
of just some really deep, hard, lots of therapy sessions about the dog.
Yeah, that's great.
It's great.
I love that.
What about you guys?
My vocal practice kind of actually started before all of this, and I've been trying to figure out how to have a hobby, how to do, which my
Yeah.
therapist doesn't like that language, but how to do things that feel fun and life giving to me that aren't work, because I love work is life giving for me, but to do something separate from that. And so a friend and I have been learning how to sew together.
Really?
So we've been making things like tote bags and quilts, and we've actually spent the last week and a half sewing masks for the
No
women's hospitals,
way.
and yeah, it's been really fun. So I've really enjoyed that. I'm also reading is always going to be
Yes.
a focal practice for me,
Same.
but
Fiction.
for me, I need to get out of, in this season especially, get out of my head and get
Yeah.
into my body, and so that's why sewing is something tangible and practical for me.
Bethany, you're a walker. I know that.
Yeah, I like to walk.
You're frequently spotted around town on a walk with your sister or something.
Yeah, I'm a walker. Poetry has been huge in this season. Also, just doing a puzzle has been
Really?
some focal work for me. And yeah, I bought a couple and was like, let's go. And my mom always did puzzles. She was like the kind of woman who glued them all together.
Yeah.
Wow.
At the
And then like
end.
put it on the
I
wall.
love that.
Anyway,
Thomas
so
Kincaid. I'm just
come
feeling
a
the
long
vibe.
way. I'm not gluing mine together,
Wow.
but just trying to do that instead of having my phone in my hands
Yeah.
or having my TV on, instead of just having music and lighting a candle and doing a puzzle
Oh,
at night.
that's
So,
awesome.
Yeah,
Great.
I mean, I don't think it's anything profound, but it's been helpful.
And this can also, like, I think double as kind of just an act of celebration.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
spiritual discipline
totally.
of celebration. Just how do you, in a time that is sad and grief and fear and legitimate suffering, how do we, it's the Bono line, joy is an act of defiance against
Yeah.
evil. How do we defy evil?
Yes.
One puzzle at a time.
Yeah.
One poem at a time.
Someone
one
stitch that
walk
somewhere.
your dog
That's
at a time.
right.
You know?
Put that somewhere.
Number 5 is a relational touch point with a close friend, family member, or your community buddy. For those of you listening, we put our whole church on the buddy system,
Yeah.
for better or for worse. I don't know what the
great.
reviews,
For
mixed
better
reviews
so
on
far.
that.
I don't
I
know.
love it. It's been
Me too.
great.
It's great.
And it's a flashback, by the way, in my mind, to the Heavyweights movie in the 90s, which was
so good.
wonderful. If
My
you haven't seen it in
oldest
quarantine,
son
on
you
Disney
is
should.
Plus.
begging us to do that for family movie night this week. Actually,
You have to do it. It's so
Take that
good.
as a
Ben
prophetic
Stiller,
word.
You've got to do it.
Confirmation. I can't remember. I think I saw it forever. I don't remember it at
Oh,
all.
man.
There's the buddy system. They do it. And that's what I envision every time.
don't know
When
that it
we took it on
ages
as
well, but
Bridgetown, it probably doesn't age well. So just that's.
But I think
that
the
is a
point
disappointment.
was, if the enemy wants to exploit us by moving us toward isolation,
That's right.
Yeah.
the opportunity
Warrior
here is to
shoes.
move toward deeper relational ties,
Yes.
which
Yep.
is a bit of a pain to do, but bring back the phone call. Like,
That's right.
I'm
Let's go. That
I'm
is
not a
my
FaceTime
mantra.
guy. I'm like, but I dig the phone call, especially like walking and talking on the phone. That's my jam.
It's good.
love that.
I love it too. I'm a phone call person. So
I'm
yeah.
learning to be, especially in these seasons.
Gavin's really grown.
Man,
I
it's
can
tough.
say that. That's
Yeah.
it's a growth edge for him too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been good. And the relational touch point, I think, for for those of us who aren't at home with other humans, so important in this
Yes.
space. And to actually have a rule of life forces you to be intentional. As much as the buddy system can feel a little bit taxing at the end of the day or whatever, it's so healthy. I've realized even the last week we did it in our community, and it was just so healthy for me every day
Yes.
to be in touch with someone who's asking really deep and intentional questions. And then, I have friends and stuff I can touch base with, but this
Yeah.
it really has forced me. I think we were joking about Zoom fatigue, but it's forced me to operate in a different energy with people. But that's also
Yes.
cultivating something in me by way of relational depth and having to access it in different ways than I normally do. And that's been good,
Oh gosh, it's so good.
Hard.
Yeah.
but good.
We're not alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
And whether you're living alone like Bethany is, or, my wife said to me, I think it was last night or the night before, she's like, it's so weird. She's like, I feel exhausted from people. She's extroverted, but because she's with our family all day long and our kids in particular. And I'm working long hours right now, and she's doing the heavy lifting on homeschooling. But then she said, I also feel lonely.
Yeah.
And so it's a weird mixture of I don't want to
Yep.
be around people
Yeah.
and I feel lonely.
Yeah.
And that's a weird emotional space,
Yes.
And what you don't need there is a party. What you need is just some deep relational ties
That's right.
Absolutely.
to carry you through.
Mm-hmm.
Number 6, moving on a little faster, limit intake of news to 1 or 2 times a day.
Boom.
Yeah.
Yes.
I feel like I could just become
Like
a professional
one.
news reader right now. I could just sit in front of my laptop and just
Ugh.
read scary news
Live
stories
tweet, yeah.
all
Instagram
day
Live,
long.
Yeah.
And so I think the heart there is, to limit your intake and not to stick your head in the ground. Like, I
Right.
think it's important right now that we're aware of what's going on in our city and around the world, but that we limit that. That is a formative, fear-based, journal. I'm all for journalism. I wanted to be a journalist. There's still days when I want to be a journalist, but it is capitalism. And there are great, wonderful, noble, brilliant minds at work in it. But at the end of the day, the goal is to make money. Or at least it has to make money. And the things that make money are fear and anger and polarization. So that's just a part of the way the system works. And that doesn't mean we throw out the baby with the bathwater. I'm very grateful. I read mainstream news every day, all of that. But I think we have to limit our intake because it has such a formational impact, making us angry and anxious and getting us into ideological enclaves and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think it's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be confusing too. Can I just add that for the rest of us? I mean, being in that space, it gets me in my it's like my spirit and my mind are in conflict when I'm absorbing that much
Yes.
information, where I'm like, what's the right thing here? Like, this is the information, but where's my heart supposed to be?
Yeah, because
So-
maybe God's speaking to you in the morning and you're
Totally.
quiet and you're coming to rest and you're feeling joy. And then all of a sudden you're like,
Right.
your limbic system is just like wigging out.
Yeah.
Finally, for the daily practices, number 7 is limit screen time and escapist behaviors, such as, just stuff like social media, alcohol, sugar, fat, just stuff like the stuff that we go to just get like a quick emotional hit to like assuage the chaos in
Yeah.
our soul, but that then often becomes a compulsion and then often becomes an addiction.
Yeah.
And just to set a limit, and it's not like don't watch Netflix or don't have a glass of wine or don't have quesadillas. It's just like
No,
limit.
you're definitely not saying that.
Yeah, that is not of the spirit of Jesus.
No way.
It's just limit it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's important in this one to acknowledge that, like what you're just saying, that these escapist behaviors aren't automatically bad. The things that we're doing in these spaces aren't
Yes.
bad. It's why we're doing them.
Those are some of the most dangerous ones.
That's
Are
right.
the ones that aren't like
Yeah.
morally culpable.
Yeah, that's right.
You
So we
know?
could talk about the fact, Pornhub released stats that said pornography is through the roof now compared to before the pandemic. Yes, those things are included as well. But we're also talking about the things you take into your body and social media, and be conscious of these things and start asking yourself. Part of escapist behavior is asking yourself why.
Yeah.
What am I escaping
What
from?
am I running away from?
Which connects you to the buddy system, having somebody asking you those questions. Hey,
Yes.
tell me about that. And we're saying don't judge yourself, non-judgmental observation, but then figure out why and figure out what else, what could you do instead, and have somebody walk you in that area.
Gosh, so good. Bethany, why don't you take us through the last 3?
Yeah, so we recommend 3 weekly practices or rhythms. And the first is prayer and fasting on Tuesdays. We do that. We've been doing that as a church. And
After we watch heavyweights and escape into quesadillas,
and
then we fast
we
and
think
pray.
about the Hershey syrup that is all over. Anyway, yeah, and it's been so good. But in this space, we're just really trying to lean in. And
Yeah.
I think this goes back to even some of that, like what we're limiting for the purpose of actually experiencing in full what we
Yes.
can. And I think that's the hope. The posture isn't we're just going to do this because this is some religious thing we want to throw out there as Bridgetown. We're doing it because we want to move against the tide that says just consume and medicate and get through. Instead
Yes.
show up
Partner
to this
with God.
moment
Yes, in this,
and-
yeah.
yeah, and see what's possible by being present. And I think it's been a prophetic, beautiful space for myself personally, but I think also for our church family. So
One of the things I love about fasting too that makes it so hard for Westerners is it's embodied practice.
That's right.
Yeah.
You don't do it with your mind. You do it with your body. It's a way of praying
Mm-hmm.
with your body, which is
Yes.
so weird for the post-Descartesian kind of world, Cartesian world that we live in. But it's so healthy and good just to get me more in touch with my body's
Yeah.
desire for God
Yes.
and a desire for him to move.
Yeah. So I think it's been unbelievably helpful for me in this space, even if not feeling like I always have words to know how to pray. It's almost
Yeah.
that spirit groaning space
Oh,
where I'm able to
100%.
put my
Yeah.
body in that
Yes.
posture on Tuesdays and say like, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy.
Yeah, I don't know,
And-
but
and
here's
then
my
just,
body.
Here's my body.
desire.
Here's my time. Here's my presence. Here's my spirit showing up to this
Yep.
moment. Do your best, you know?
Yes.
So Tuesdays have been that for us, I
So
think.
well said.
And so I think there's wisdom in doing that and leaning into practices we don't normally get to access in other seasons. I think this is one of those. Just been phenomenal.
So good.
Next, we'd say show up to your community during the week, and we think that's just wise. That's part of this. Also, it goes back to the relational touch points, looking people, even if it's over Zoom.
I was gonna say,
eye to
show up
eye.
means virtually, right now.
And, show up virtually.
don't
Please
break the
touch
rules.
them,
We're all
sneeze on them,
we're
cough on
law-abiding.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, show up virtually to your community, whatever that looks like, and be committed to that. And I was just talking to a community leader today where she was like, "Man, I'm just so afraid they're all gonna kind of flake out." And I
Yeah.
just said, "Well, then say that.
Yeah.
Speak out the fear of what you're, of the fear of what could happen if
Yes.
if there's no connection, and then lean in even further and harder and be more committed."
Yeah, because it's weird. It's less fun right now. We're not sitting around a table
Absolutely.
eating a
Right.
meal.
Yeah.
And who brought the wine tonight? It's like Zoom after all day of
Right.
Zoom and glitchy internet. Or,
And like saltine crackers.
But
That's right,
Yeah,
yeah.
but we need it more than ever.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
You know, we need community, and that's the problem with people that don't want to commit to community. I don't mean that sounds negative, but I think we don't want to commit to community. But then the reality is, then when we hit a crisis, that's when we need community the most.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so often there are months or even years where you're just kind of sowing into these relationships, and it's non-glamorous and it's not a high, and you don't feel all of the spiritual formation. You just feel like, all right, Tuesday night.
Yep.
But actually, when you hit the crisis, that's when oh man, like it's mandatory, and the rubber meets the road, and all of this good stuff comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been the highlight of my week, even
Yeah.
when I don't anticipate that it will be.
Really?
Since pandemic. Yeah, it's just been so life-giving, I think, for our community. Gavin and I are in the same
Yeah.
community. It's just been a new sweet season of depth and intimacy for us that
Wow.
was certainly unexpected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's weird because we normally eat a meal together for the first hour and then talk for the second half, do something intentional time. And last night we were at 2 full hours and we could have kept going if we wanted to.
Really?
Like, it was
Yeah.
like intentional. We'd split out guys and girls via the breakout option on Zoom.
Yep.
It was just really neat. It's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And then finally, we would say practice Sabbath and
Yeah. Come
show
on.
up virtually to whatever your kind of worship gathering or worship space looks like on Sundays. And those things are just.
You mean go to my living room
Yeah. With your
and
sweat.
log
I
on to
mean,
bridgetown.church.
Perhaps put on a different pair of
online.
sweatpants.
Let me tell you, it is a weird experience to watch yourself preach in your own bathrobe.
Oh, man.
It's
No,
just it's-
absolutely.
That's not something I will miss when
Yeah,
all
I
of
don't
this
want
is
that.
over.
I don't want that.
Well, we're enjoying it in the meantime. But yeah, I think the Sabbath practice for me, it was essential this week. It was actually the first Sabbath I took, and man, the work that I needed to do just in slowing down was profound. I underestimated what this crisis, how it was impacting me, and when I got to Sabbath, it was like, wow.
Yeah.
So I couldn't.
That's something there.
Yeah.
And I just to throw a little advocacy in, I think there's never been a better time for digital Sabbath. Again, these are not
Yes.
rules, these are not commands of the New Testament. I just think it's wisdom, and there's lots of secular neuroscience people that my wife's doctor, my wife has chronic health issues, said you need at least a 24-hour break from all devices for your brain and your nervous system. So there's scientific reasons for it. There's spiritual reasons for it. I think it's just good wisdom to take a day off every week if you can from your device, or in some ways, like I know you FaceTime family, when you're actually
Not so much
using it
during
as a tool.
pandemic.
Not so much during pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I literally was like, I can't look at a screen. I
Yeah,
have so much
totally.
fatigue that now
Yeah.
I'm like, I'll do it during the week, but on Sabbath, it is
It's
off.
not.
And that's
Yeah.
it too, is even what we were talking about earlier of like this blend of our when we're working and when we're not working during the day. It's so difficult right now.
With screens.
That Sabbath is like a perfect, well, I do know when work ends, and it's going to be this time to this time on
Yes.
one day every single week, and you can look
This
forward
is
to
some
that.
order. So a number of people in our churches, do you know this, that have like bought like old school landlines? Because apparently it's like
No.
$20
No,
a
I
month
didn't
or
know that.
something.
Great.
Just because for the people that like, I can't be out of touch for a whole
Oh,
day.
good for
What if
them.
something happens with my
a
mom?
great idea.
Or
Yeah.
and so they just have gotten like landlines, and nobody really calls them.
Yeah,
you
sure,
know.
of course.
But it's like in case of an emergency, like I
Yeah.
know I could get a hold of Matt and Anna
I
on
love that.
Saturday.
That's
you know?
great.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. But the point is just to have that order in the sea of chaos. And Sabbath, actually, in the Genesis narrative, is all about taking chaos and making order.
That's right.
And Sabbath is the crown of that. So this was just a little kind of in-depth exploration of our recommended rule of life. Everything's available at bridgetown.church. And it's all there for you. If you're listening from another church, take anything you want. Bless you, love you. But Bridgetown, we're just so grateful that you're up for serious, intentional apprenticeship to Jesus in a very crazy time. And this too will pass, but we want to journey through this and come out the other side, not the same, and definitely not having moved back, but having moved forward in our spiritual formation. And just to end, I would remind you that, a rule of life, you have to say this 1,000 times. So this is one time. So repeat this. It is a means to an end.
Yeah.
It's not an end. People get into legalism when they get that out of order, and they get into liberalism when they throw out the baby with the bathwater. And the point is not, are you living by our recommended rule of life? Who cares? The point is, are you living in the presence, and as a result, becoming a person of love and joy and peace? And a great means to do that is a rule of life.
Yeah.
And as we already say, you already have a rule of life.
Yeah.
You might not call
That's
it that. It might be intentional. It might be unintentional. It might be conscious. It might be subconscious. It might be chosen by you. It might be dictated by Silicon Valley. But you already have one. And so to follow Jesus is just to reorient your rule of life and all of your life around him and his kingdom. And every day, no matter what is going on in our body with sickness and around our world, is just an invitation from Jesus to move deeper into the kingdom. So that's all this is, just a vehicle to go. Love to all of you. Thanks for listening, and can't wait until we're all back together again in the same room.